This is TechKnow, a show about innovations that can change lives.
The science of fighting a wildfire.
We're going to explore the intersection of hardware and humanity, and we're doing it in a unique way. This is a show about science.
Oh my God.
By scientists. Tonight, TechKnow investigates the ivory trail. They've tried to seize it, burn it, but nothing has stopped the terrible trade in illegal ivory. Now, new tools. Straight from the lab that could fight a crime that's brought elephants to the brink of extinction.
Getting a seizure is a great victory, but the elephants are already dead.
Marita Davison is an environmental biologist.
I am holding a tray of elephant poop.
She'll show us the high-tech plan to stop the killing.
Wow.
Then, sea lions stranded along a California freeway. Yes, freeway. Dr. Shini Samara is a mechanical engineer. She'll show us what's been done to find out why this is happening.
At this stage, are they feeling distressed?
And I'm Phil Torres. I'm an entomologist. That's our team.
Lindsay?
Now let's do some science. Welcome to TechKnow. I'm Phil Torres, joined by Marita Davison and Dr. Shini Samara. Guys, there are outlaws out there who are working in the shadows, committing horrible acts against defenseless yet majestic animals. We're talking about the ivory poachers who have decimated the populations of elephants in Africa.
And it's really alarming because ivory goes for about $1,000 a pound. That's more valuable than illegal drugs.
And you know what that means is that the damage has been devastating. Over 100,000 elephants have been killed in just the last 3 years. And the question is, what can we do about it? We found a team of scientists that are using some unexpected weapons, DNA and radiocarbon dating. Let's check it out. April 18th, 2015. Thai Customs intercepts 4 tons of ivory smuggled in bean sacks from the Democratic Republic of Congo. It is the largest seizure in this country's history. The ivory, on the way to Laos, seized in Bangkok after a tip. The seizure makes headlines.
Thai Customs displayed over 3 tons of confiscated African ivory worth $6 million.
A historic bust of ivory from Kenya.
And that equates to almost 900 elephants.
But the perpetrators of this horrible crime against animals are never caught. For law enforcement entities like Interpol, stopping the killing of elephants at the source is what's critical. The question is, where exactly is all this ivory coming from?
They almost always ship the ivory out of a different country from where it was poached, because that's where you start your search. You're looking in the wrong place.
Yeah. Sam Wasser is the director of the Center for Conservation Biology at the University of Washington. When it comes to solving the mysteries of the illegal trade, Wasser has created a coalition of scientists, virtual detectives using techniques in DNA extraction from ivory, genetic mapping through dung sampling, and radiocarbon dating. This multi-pronged approach attacks a criminal enterprise that's brought the majestic African elephant to the brink of extinction.
There's probably only 450,000 elephants left, so the whole focus of our lab is to really try to use DNA assignment of large ivory seizures.
Singapore, 2002. 6.5 tons of ivory seized. The largest in the country's history. Roughly 650 elephants were killed for this haul of ivory. But where in Africa did the ivory originate from? They assume this much ivory must come from multiple sources. Authorities send samples to Wasser's lab for analysis.
Right now, from anywhere in Africa, we can assign a seizure of ivory closer than 300 kilometers to where it came from.
Wasser and his team get to work. The first step is to prepare the samples of seized ivory.
We cut off a piece of the ivory, and then what we do is we stick that piece inside a plastic tube with a magnet and stainless steel plugs on the end. We drop that in liquid nitrogen, which cools it to about minus 240 degrees Celsius, so extremely cold. Within 3 minutes, it comes out like baby powder.
Oh, so it's just to pulverize
So it pulverizes the ivory and it preserves the DNA at the same time. That was one of the biggest breakthroughs of our lab.
The elephant DNA from the ivory seized in Singapore is extracted and analyzed in Wasser's lab. The DNA from the tusks is then matched against a genetic reference map of Africa's elephant populations. This map has been generated by DNA taken from another source, rich in elephant DNA. I am holding a tray of elephant poop. Not exactly something you'd associate as a tool for fighting international crime, but these samples provide critical pieces of data for creating a genetic map of elephants across Africa. Yep, collecting dung samples may not be glamorous work, but it's a task Wasser and his team take seriously.
We make the map from the dung. We take genetic markers out of the dung samples. So you see here this map of Africa. There's about 1,400 total samples here, and each sample is from a separate family group.
Wasser was able to determine the origin of the 6.5 tons of ivory seized in Singapore and shipped out of Malawi. It all came from a neighboring country, Zambia. Wasser's team had made a discovery that would revolutionize law enforcement's approach to poaching. Basically, this study debunked some of the assumptions that you and Interpol had about how these activities were working. What were those assumptions?
Yeah, and so it was assumptions that law enforcement in general had, and one was when you get a big seizure, they were cherry-picked from all over Africa, and what we showed is that's not what's happening. They're poached in the same area over and over and over again.
The plight of the African elephant has been well documented. These heartbreaking images were shot in a sanctuary for elephant orphans in Kenya.
From before, the biggest enemy of elephants when they're out in the world is man.
This 2-year-old, being bottle-fed, stood by his mother's body for 3 days after she was murdered for her tusks.
So first you kill the bulls, and then you kill the matriarch, so now you're destroying the leadership in your group, as well as the long-term knowledge that these elephants have.
And when elephants become vulnerable, so does the rest of the ecosystem.
There are these keystone species where you take this one out and it has this huge ripple effect on all these other species. Elephants are true keystone species.
Sophisticated transnational syndicates oversee every step of the trade, from the illegal poaching to the smuggling of tusks to carving factories and shops around the world. This footage, part of an undercover investigation, captures a shipping agent explaining how ivory is smuggled out of Africa.
They drop container in Hong Kong, after that they take it to Taiwan.
We need an urgent method that stops the killing. Even getting a seizure is a great victory, but the elephants are already dead.
Last month, Singaporean customs seized another shipment of ivory, coming out of Kenya and headed for Vietnam. 3.7 tons, worth an estimated $8 million. Singaporean authorities have already contacted Wasser to oversee DNA analysis. Wasser's lab now receives samples from over 90% of all large ivory seizures.
What we are trying to really do is to figure out where are the major poaching hotspots across Africa.
His latest study, based on DNA analysis of 28 seizures between 1996 and 2014, reveals there may be only 2 major hotspots for poaching in Africa: southern Tanzania and a place known as the Tridom. When you're saying hotspots, you mean hotspots of poaching activity, hotspots of seizure activity? What are you referring to?
A hotspot is a place where you are able to provide multiple tons of ivory repeatedly over multiple years. Then we have a place we can focus law enforcement on, take those out, and perhaps choke the source of the ivory from entering the network and unravel it. So that's the big plan.
A TechKnow crew member is on vacation in Thailand when he comes across this all-too-common display. He's told they are ivory pieces, offered up for sale for a price. The sale of ivory to foreigners is illegal in Thailand. Yet as our camera reveals, it goes on. As this old newsreel footage shows, ivory was once very popular.
Ivory carving, a craft that's centuries old,
But all that changed in 1990 when the international trade in ivory was made illegal. DNA analysis is one tool that could ultimately help governments crack down on where ivory is coming from. But it can't tell investigators when the killing took place.
Anything post-ban is illegal to trade. What it comes down to is this radiocarbon dating method can tell us if trade of ivory is legal or not.
Kevin Uno is a geochemist who uses a method known as radiocarbon dating to determine the age of ivory.
This is the part of the tusk that was actually growing when the animal was shot. Because we need to know when did this elephant die, and so this part of the tusk tells us that. And so we drill the powder onto this whey paper here. And then we collect it into these vials.
Next, the ivory powder is combusted and turned into pure CO2. So what is this?
When we combust it in this tube, there's other impurities in there, other gases. So we need to get rid of those so that when we measure the radiocarbon content, we just are measuring the CO2 gas.
Radiocarbon dating literally relies on the fallout from events that took place from 1952 to 1963.
3, 2, 1, fire.
Above-ground atomic testing.
Between the United States and the Soviet Union, we basically doubled the radiocarbon concentration in the atmosphere.
Now, what does that mean then for organisms when you have a spike in radiocarbon in the atmosphere?
What it did do is give them all a unique geochemical fingerprint in their tissues. All these photosynthetic organisms, trees, grasses, that sort of thing, are taking in CO2, some of it having carbon-14 in it, and then the animals that eat that then also take on that radiocarbon signature. Look, there it is. You can actually see it's freezing down on the right side. So now what we're gonna do is torch it off and have the final product, okay? Just gonna bring this down.
And you do this individually for each sample.
Yeah.
So it's time consuming.
It is.
Okay.
So you'll wanna wear these to watch this process. So this is just a regular methane torch. But
not to be done at home.
Okay, we kind of warm the glass all around. And then it's sort of like pulling soft serve.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's gooey.
And now you can see, there's our CO2 right there.
Wow, so that's the frozen CO2.
Yeah, from an elephant, heading for a radiocarbon analysis.
After Uno receives the radiocarbon content of a piece of ivory, he can match it against the bomb curve, a record of atmospheric levels of C14 before and after the atomic testing era. The radiocarbon dating of ivory could be used to verify the age of ivory being sold on the legal market as antiques.
So here's the bomb curve, and I call this left side before 1963 the rising limb. So the tusk is imprinted with the radiocarbon concentration from that year. So we can then go and measure that radiocarbon concentration and say, okay, it's, for example, 1.3. And that allows us to draw a horizontal line across the bomb curve here. And you can see it actually intersects it in two places.
Twice,
so we have two answers. It could be 1960, or it could be 1980. So the way to do this is to sample part of the tusk that you know is older, and then the part of the tusk you know is younger, and compare the relative radiocarbon concentrations and just fit them back onto this curve. So if the older one has a higher concentration and the younger has a lower, then you're on this falling limb of the bomb curve.
November 2013. Canadian authorities learned that a pair of tusks are being offered by this Toronto-based auction house as antiques. Suspecting the tusks are not as old as the sellers claim, authorities confiscate them and turn them over to Uno.
I dated a pair of tusks, clearly showing that this elephant was poached after the law went into effect, and the auction house went to court and pleaded guilty.
Now, Uno and collaborator Turi Serling have teamed up with Wasser to apply this technique to investigate trends in the international trade in illegal ivory. Since the international ban, African countries have been stockpiling confiscated ivory. Occasionally, they destroy some of it, but much of it remains sitting in government warehouses.
So they have huge stockpiles on the order of 100 or 120 tons in some of these nations. Wow. So they're sitting on this ivory, waiting for the day that the international market opens again.
If current poaching hotspots are shut down, The next major source for ivory could be these stockpiles, and radiocarbon dating would help confirm it. To what extent do you wrestle with despair at the situation, and to what extent do you embrace hope?
There have been some seizures where I gotta say, you know, when we pulled them out and started rinsing them off and the blood was pouring off, that we were just sitting there in tears. I mean, you know, that has happened. But, you know, you get used to it, and then you start getting these breakthroughs. And so now I feel like, you know, we've got a plan. I feel like we're making an impact. And that's really what drives me.
These types of DNA techniques that you talk about, that practice has been done for a long time to maybe track the origin of a disease. What took it so long to get to tracking down poachers?
You know, we've used DNA techniques to understand populations of lots of wildlife. We're using it within the context of conservation a lot more now. It's still a fairly new field.
So there was a time when ivory was used in piano keys and billiard balls, and now it's illegal. But why is the market still so robust?
The main markets are in China, and then actually the United States is the second largest player here. Part of what's driving that is that there's some communities in the US that really value ivory. Ivory is, you mostly find it as an ornamental carving. It's very beautiful when it's polished and carved, and it carries a sort of status because of its value. So there's still a pretty high demand.
Now, there was a crisis unfolding on the coast of California from San Diego up to San Francisco and beyond.
Sea lions are leaving their natural ocean habitat and wandering up on shore, even sometimes in people's yards and streets.
Well, I joined a ride-along where we were literally rescuing sea lion pups. The story is crazy, some of it's heartbreaking, and it's coming up next.
This sea lion pup named Johnny Cash is making a run towards the open ocean with a satellite transmitter tagged to his back. He may hold the answers to a sad epidemic along California's coastline. There are plenty of highways that hug California's ocean shores. LA's 90 freeway isn't one of them. The sight of a baby sea lion a quarter of a mile inland is unsettling. But in 2015, it's not that unusual, according to local news agencies.
The creatures are stranding, starving, and apparently dying in record numbers this year along the coast.
The images tell a haunting story.
While we have seen spikes in recent years, 2015 is already off to an unusually bad start.
The headlines paint a picture of an epidemic of sick pups in desperate search of food. But what's really going on is more complex. TechKnow went to the San Diego headquarters for NOAA, a federal agency that studies the oceans, for answers.
What's happened in the last 2 years is the waters in the Northeast Pacific have warmed up way beyond anything we're used to.
According to NOAA, a warmer ocean off Southern California has made it harder for nursing sea lions to forage. And, as a result, the pups are not getting enough nourishment. El Niño is an event scientists have seen several times, but this year's temperatures are quite different.
What's really different is that the waters in the Northeast Pacific warmed up over a year ago, and usually that warming occurs after the El Niño develops. In this case, it preceded it.
Ocean warming impacts the food chain from the bottom up, as upwelling winds are causing deep water currents, typically rife with cold water nutrients, to circulate up mostly nutrient-depleted warm water.
So when you talk about nutrients, what is that?
That biologic material in the deep ocean gets remineralized into inorganic nutrients. And so the upwelling then keeps that cycle going.
So how does it affect the top of the food chain?
The whole food chain gets depressed. A lot of those fish species that could move have moved northward, and the food source is a lot less than we had last year.
And the evidence can be seen daily all along the Californian coast, from San Diego to San Francisco. In San Diego, SeaWorld, the company which faced public heat for orca shows, has taken a public role in sea lion rescue efforts.
Gosh, it's really exciting. Yeah. How long do you feed them for?
Typically, we'll be tube feeding for about 12 days. At about 5 days, they have gained enough strength where they actually start showing some interest again in fish, and they will start taking 1 or 2 fish.
Sea lions are first admitted to an almost triage-like setting. The pups are fed a special protein-rich formula. Up to 200 tube feedings a day take place behind the scenes.
We have to gradually wean them on it because their bodies haven't seen fish and they can't process it properly. They have to show to us that they can fully process 3 to 5 pounds of fish per day, which is what they would require to maintain their weight before we stop tube feeding them.
Brent Stewart observes sea lion health at SeaWorld's non-profit research arm.
So in studying their habitats, are you able to get a better idea of what's happening in terms of global climate change?
Food seemed to have vanished for some reason. The question is whether that's a sign, I think, of long-term climate change. The bigger issue is, are these little intense events that we're seeing recently going to become more common as climate generally changes?
According to the National Marine Fisheries Service, it's the worst year ever, as rescued pups are returning starved again.
It is the most historically busy year ever. There's already been 2,500 sea lions stranded in California this year alone in the first 12 weeks that we're into the year.
Marine biologist and executive director of the Pacific Marine Mammal Center, Keith Matassa, has seen it all.
They're actually 6 months old coming into us under birth weight. That's how starved they are. The other difference in this year that we didn't see in 2013 and 2014 is that we're now seeing a lot of adults coming in that are very emaciated, very starved. You can see every bone in their body. And that's a difference from the last 2 years.
Matassa and his team use satellite tagging technology to understand why this is happening. Tagging sea lions is so new that these pups are research pioneers.
And we wanted to make sure that the animals that we were putting back out into the wild during this unusual event were actually making it.
Tagging happens fast, as I learned watching Johnny Cash get his device. He spent 2 months gaining 25 pounds and is a worthy candidate.
You're fine. I'm not going to let him bite you. You're good. So you're trying to seal the edges?
Yeah, we're going to try to do some more in the back.
That looks secure.
Yeah, it's secure. We're just going to tighten it up in the back and we'll be good.
This year, several sea lions returned to Matassa's rehab, starving once again. With rescue centres along the coast compiling satellite tagging data, there's hope that Johnny Cash and his newly released friends will beat the odds and walk the line towards survival rather than restranding.
Well, hopefully they're not returnees and they live a long, happy life.
That's the plan, and that's what's going to happen. We're going to see them out on the rocks in 9 or 10 years, and they're going to be big and healthy and happy.
I work on a lot of behavior in my research, and what I find really fascinating about this is what is causing this behavior. Of these sea lion pups aren't just going in a little bit from shore, they're going miles. They're going on this long journey in there. So something evolved in them that the changing climate is just messing with their innate response to temperature. It's fascinating.
Or could it be just utter desperation, right? I mean, if you reach a certain level of lack of nutrition, does that suddenly kick in some sort of instinct to just go wherever necessary to find something?
I mean, because of sea temperatures, you know, the food that they normally feed on has moved somewhere. And so these sea lion pups are starving and they are cold. You're right, they are absolutely desperate.
Oh, that's really heartbreaking.
Each of tonight's stories showed problems with the environment, but more importantly, we got to meet some very smart folks trying to solve them. That's it for today's episode. Be sure to check us out next time here on TechKnow. Dive deep into these stories and go behind the scenes at aljazeera.com/techknow. Follow our expert contributors on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Google+, and more.